Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmed. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace. Hey folks, welcome back to Consulting Mastery. Before we get you to this week's episode, I wanted to let you know that we have a live workshop coming up on power positioning for consultants. If you want to learn the exact same framework that we teach our clients inside 90-Day Pipeline of how to position themselves as the one and only indisputable choice in their markets, attract perfect clients, and command premium fees, you can do so on our live workshop at powerpositioningworkshop.com. It's just $49 to join us, and you can grab your seat at powerpositioningworkshop.com. With that, here's this week's episode. Pet peeve time. Can I share a pet peeve?
It's my favorite time.
That's what this podcast is about, really.
It really is. It's just giving you a chance
ranting and raving about what we dislike and what drives us nuts.
Yeah.
Here's what drives me nuts. Here's what really grinds my gears, to use a 90s reference. It's a 90s, nice. I don't know. This notion that underpromise and overdeliver is a smart business strategy. That's what we do. That's what we do. We underpromise and we overdeliver, i.e. we temper people's expectations on the front end, and then we exceed their expectations. And I get it. Like, I understand the logic there is if we are realistic about expectations up front and then we exceed them, then there's delight. It's a happy surprise. People are, I'd say, more satisfied. I think that's the psychology behind this, right? Is that people are going to be more satisfied when an experience exceeds their expectations. But I have a big problem with it.
I would say I also have a big problem with it, but mostly because, as most things in the world these days, there's very little nuance to it. And so I think there's certainly opportunity when you're working with somebody to, find the little ways to delight them, right? To figure out what's a thing that I could do that maybe they weren't expecting, and always be on the lookout for those things. That, I think, is a perfectly good strategy. But sandbagging the expectations at the beginning, terrible strategy. Terrible. And so, I think there's something there about your approach to it, right? Is this some kind of manipulative tactic? Or, you're trying to hustle folks, which I'm not going to get behind? Or is it a case of, once I'm in a relationship with somebody, right? Once I'm really working with them, of course, I'm going to do whatever I can do that makes sense in the context and the scope of the work that we're doing together to ensure that they walk away maybe happier than they would have thought they would be when we finished our time together.
I think it depends on what you're selling. I think for McDonald's, it's fine. The little toy I get in my Happy Meal is a nice surprise. They didn't promise it to me, but sure, I get my Big Mac and my large Coke, and I don't eat these things for the record. I just assume that in a Happy Meal there's a toy, right? And so fine. For a highly kind of commoditized product or service, underpromise, overdeliver. I mean, my expectations for a commodity are not all that wild anyways. So if you can exceed those expectations, it's perfectly fine. My problem is when we're talking about this in the context of, and I've heard very smart consultants say this, when we're talking about this in the context of high fee, high value, expensive consulting, advisory, professional services, is in today's market, and the backdrop to this conversation is the competitive landscape. In today's market, if you underpromise, you are invisible. You effectively get ignored. Yes, you can maybe afford to underpromise when you have a very high degree of trust with the prospect. And how many of those do you really have, right? So assuming that you want to go beyond, the very small finite network of folks that have direct experience working with you, in which you have a very high level of trust with, and you want to go to the broader market who doesn't know you, doesn't trust you, doesn't care about you, you're just another firm, another consultant, and you want to win business in that market, under promising is going to get you ignored. Flat out.
I also wonder, like, what does underpromise even mean in this context, right? What are we even talking about? Because if you're out in the world with a particular solution, right, you're talking to a prospect about finding a way to deliver that solution into their business. Like, what's even the logic behind underpromising, right? You're either going to do the thing you said you were going to do or you're not. And so, it's also worth just being really clear about what is this phrase that is flying around that
Well,
offends both of
so
us.
I think practically it's a really good point, right? Practically what it means is no promise. What people actually do practically is they don't make any promise,
Mhm.
any claim. They don't create any expectation of results. Under promising. Well, we're going to go in and we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to go through these processes. We're going to give you these deliverables. To what end? Well, I don't want to overpromise. I don't want to create any expectations whatsoever that there will be results, because that's overpromising. So I think practically that's what happens. And the thing is, you can win business doing it that way. Don't get me wrong, you can win business doing it that way. But think about, if I'm hiring two consultants and one of them is an under-promise consultant, okay? And they're like, well, and their conversation with me is very much focused on activity, deliverables, inputs. We're going to do X, we're going to do Y, we're going to do Z. Okay? And there's not really much of an articulation of expectation of results, because that's overpromising. And the other consultant has, frankly, the exact same process. Like, they're indistinguishable. They do X, they do Y, and they do Z. And their credentials are the same, and their track record is the same, very comparable. But the second consultant creates an expectation, creates an anticipation of results. That when we do X, Y, and Z, it's going to yield typically this type of result.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what you can expect. When we consider the risks, etc., if we do this right and that right, put all the caveats you want in there. But if we do it right, we do it this way, we're going to get this type of result.
Well, sorry.
I was going to say, it's obvious who I'm working with. And guess who I'm paying more also?
Yeah. Well, what you're highlighting really is the difference between promising process and promising results, right? Like, let's just restate that and clarify it. And so two challenges or two things to think about. One is, what does your buyer want? Right? Ideally, they want the result. I mean, truly, they want the result. They may come to you asking for process because they feel like that's the thing that's going to make them comfortable, right? How many times they're going to meet, what kind of reports are going to look like, what's the report going to look like, all these details, when what they truly want is the results. And so it also means that you need to do a little bit more work, right? When someone comes to you in that headspace, asking you for how many times do we meet? Asking you that question. It's your job to redirect them, reconnect them to the thing they really, really want, which is the outcome. And that can feel scary, right? Because I'm having this conversation, I'm on the sales call. I just want to give them what they're asking for. But if we go back to something that we talk about, all the time, which is standing in the shoes of the expert, right? Framing yourself as the expert. the expert knows that what they don't need is meetings. What they don't need is 15 pages instead of 3 pages. What they need is the outcome that they're looking for. And now let's talk about, on the flip side, how that just makes your life easier. Because if you are also focused on the result, right? If you're focused on getting them where they need to go, as opposed to scheduling the weekly meeting or writing the gigantic report, you're also making the right decisions for them. And you're probably doing it in a much more efficient way for yourself, right? And so this is all about circling back to the whole point of entering into a contract with somebody, right? The whole point of delivering your solution, the whole point of having a sales conversation or having a business to start with as a consultant.
Entering into a consulting engagement without a clearly articulated expectation of results is like getting into an Uber and saying, let's drive 10 kilometers somewhere with no destination in mind. It's madness. And yet consultants and clients do this
Yes.
every single day. Right? And I understand why. I think there's a conversation to be had here about what makes consultants uncomfortable promising. And I don't think let's have the conversation. We're not advocating for over promising.
Mm-hmm.
I'm advocating against under promising or not promising at all and not having any expectation of results or discussing that. I'm not suggesting you embellish the results or overpromise and create unrealistic expectations, but even just some expectations. And what in your mind, what's the rub there? What makes people uncomfortable about that?
I think what makes people uncomfortable about that is having to get clear on what is the result. Because defining a result can happen in a bunch of different ways, right? And often what the client is looking for, as we're all looking for in life, right, is like, what's the magic bullet result, right? What's the thing that's going to guarantee? And maybe that's the subtlety to look at, is guarantee versus result, right? They're looking for you to tell them that no matter what happens, come hell or high water, whether they do their part or don't do their part, they'll get what they want. And what you're actually probably ready to promise them is something slightly different than that, right? Which is, if A, B, and C happen, we will get to D. And D looks like this. And I think there's some hesitancy sometimes to define D very clearly, because there's concern that it's not going to match what the client's looking for, right? It's either too much or it's not enough, or whatever the case may be. So again, going back to this notion of, very important notion of, the expert presence, you need to be so very clear in your discovery with this prospect, in your understanding of what they need, that you can articulate the true necessary outcome and all the conditions required to get there.
And I think it comes back to the question, in addition to that, who owns results?
Mm-hmm.
I think the underlying assumption here that makes people fundamentally uncomfortable is that the consultant is solely responsible for delivering results on a silver platter, in which case I understand the hesitation. I don't want to talk about results if it's all on me and all risk lies with me. And if we don't get results, it's my head. Yeah, I get that that's uncomfortable. But like we've talked about in several other episodes, when you understand and you're clear with the client on the joint ownership of results, a good consulting engagement is really a partnership ultimately. And there's joint ownership between you and the client over results. I don't know a consultant that can come in and get results in any domain without the right contributions and the right collaboration with the client, from and with the client. So when you understand that it's joint ownership of results ultimately, then it's like any partnership.
Mhm.
How do we get results as a partnership, whether that's a business partnership or a a romantic relationship or whatever? Well, we have to have a shared definition of what we're trying to accomplish so we can collaborate towards that end. And to your point earlier, not only do I think this wins you more deals at higher prices, this makes for better consulting engagements. You become a better consultant because you now have front and center what the client actually wants and cares about as your north star that guides all of your decisions in the engagement, because you know what they're trying to achieve and they know what they're trying to achieve. So their collaboration, their involvement, their contribution becomes focused, and everybody is rowing in the same direction, so to speak. But not if you're under promising.